Good afternoon as we let people into the webinar. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Um, Waiting for a few more folks, so take your time and get acquainted with the setup. I'm sure we've seen this a lot before. There is closed captioning, so if you click at the bottom of your screen on the more, you can show full transcript or show subtitles. And as we let more and more people in, I will go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to today's New York Heritage Bits and Bytes program featuring the Adirondack Experience with Library Director Ivy Gawker. My name is Christy Sommerfeld, and I am the Regional Services Librarian for the Northern New York Library Network, one of the 9 library councils across New York State. We are based in Potsdam, New York, which is about 30 miles south of Canada. I am the New York Heritage Digital Collections Liaison for our region, and the digital collections features a broad range of materials that present a glimpse into our state's history and culture, and I've worked with Ivy on a number of the Adirondack Experience's digital collections on heritage. The Adirondack Experience, which was formerly the Adirondack Museum based in Blue Mountain Lake, opened in 1957 and works collecting and interpreting objects that represent the lives of Adirondack residents and visitors. The Experience library collections include books, manuscripts, government documents, maps, atlases, serials, microfilms, ephemera, and audio recordings relating to the history and culture of the Adirondack Mountains and Northern New York State. The Experience features 28 digital collections on New York Heritage, consisting of mostly photographs and maps, currently numbering 7,456 items. The museum building itself boasts nearly 65,000 square feet in exhibition space, making the Experience the largest cultural organization in the North Country. During the presentation, if you do have any questions that come up, please note them in the Q&A section. I'll be monitoring that as well as the chat. Comments are of course welcome in the chat area. Please take a moment to introduce yourself. Let us know if you've ever been to the Adirondacks, where and what you enjoyed about it. And with that brief introduction I will turn it over to Ivy. Thank you, Ivy.
Thank you, Christy. I'm going to share my screen so that I can show some pictures of what we're talking about here today. So I think you can all see that. So yeah, as Christy said, I'm the library director here at the Adirondack Experience. And you know, as you can guess from our name, we collect sort of anything and everything having to do with the Adirondacks. And I started here about 5 years ago. And that's, you know, it took me a while to kind of get the lay of the land here. And one of the first library collections that I started sort of tripping over was our map collection. So we have over 2,000 maps in our collection. They've kind of fall into a few different categories, but comprehensively, I can't even give you an exact number, but I do know it's over 2,000. And these are showing, you know, all of the Adirondack Park, parts of the North Country. A lot of them are big regional maps that show everything. And then we have lots and lots of maps that are showing, you know, just a few acres. So they really range in scale as to what they're depicting. And then in terms of date range, the oldest ones are from the 1700s and they run up into the current day. So it's a pretty, even though it's all focused on the Adirondack Park, the Adirondack Mountains, there's a lot of diversity within this map collection. And so with these maps, some of them we had individually cataloged in our Past Perfect database, and they would often have low resolution images associated with them. But a lot of these maps we didn't have individually cataloged, and we only knew about them because they were listed in finding aids for other collections. So it was really hard to kind of get a grip on everything that we had here. And this meant that when someone wanted to see a map, it involved a lot of effort on my part, which I'm always trying to minimize. It would mean, you know, somebody would kind of have to figure out that we had a map, and then I would have to go down to storage, find it there, pull it out, bring it up, sometimes I would have to make a new scan of it. And sometimes these maps were stored rolled. So you'd have to unroll maybe 15 maps and figure out which one it is that the person wants to see. So I quickly realized that, we needed to do some work on the map collections. They were difficult for me to serve to the public, but even more so, like the user experience side of accessing these maps was really hard. Because a lot of times people, if they want to see maps, it's because they're doing some kind of geographically based search. So they might come to me and say, I want to see all your maps of Tupper Lake. And then I would have to take a step back and try to think of all the different collections that might have that, and all the different finding aids I might need to open up and read through to collate all of the Tupper Lake maps, for example. So it was kind of a big unwieldy project, but it seemed very clear that we needed to do something to kind of bring our map collections into the 21st century. So what I did, I applied for a grant from the Council on Library and Information Resources, and this was a 2-year digitizing hidden collections grant. So they provided us funding to send about 1,300 maps off-site for scanning at a facility called Hudson Archival, which is obviously down in the Hudson Valley. And so we kind of had that part of it. We knew we were going to get taken care of. The maps would be scanned at high resolution, which would allow us, to do all kinds of things with them in the digital realm, which is going to be a big step forward. But the thing with CLEAR is they don't want to fund everything you might need to do with your collection. And once we started, organizing the maps to send them out, it became obvious that they needed conservation work also. So what you're seeing in these images are the before and after of our map collection. So when we started out to send these, as I mentioned, they're rolled up in these dingy old boxes, and sometimes you'd have 5 or 6 maps rolled together. So a big part of this project was just going to be getting the maps flattened so that they could be scanned. And then once they were flattened, we wanted to keep them that way. So we were able to cobble together funding from other sources, including the Northern New York Library Network, where Christy works, to buy new flat file cases, to pay for Mylar sheets that the maps could then live in and be protected. So this was all kind of the, you get the money to do the digitization, and that's just the beginning, I guess. So this was the sort of messy other side of getting everything sent out and getting it scanned. These are just a couple of pictures from the facility down at Hudson Archival. That's the company's president, Toya Dubin, showing how they would take these very tightly wound maps and roll them out and put weights on them. And then in the image on the right, you can see several layers of these maps stacked up. And they would leave them flattened like that for a few months at a time, so that the maps could sort of relax on their own and make it easier for them to scan. And so when her staff would scan them, she'd make high resolution TIFFs, but also derivative JPEGs and PDFs that would make it easier for us to share the images online, because these TIFFs were often, several hundred megabytes in size. So kind of too large to be easy to share. So now that we had nice clear scans of them, we had to sort of figure out how we were going to make those scans available. So what you can see here is the image on the left is how a map displays in our PastPerfect database as you see it online. And PastPerfect kind of presented a lot of problems for us because it doesn't allow for high resolution images. So this image on the left, that's as big as you could get. And if you downloaded that file and tried to blow it up on a computer, it would just be a pixelated mess. And this just wasn't going to work to make maps accessible, because the information in maps is visual. So you need to have a clear image to work from. So then the image on the right here is how the maps display when they're in New York Heritage. And so, the beautiful thing about that interface is that you can click on a thumbnail and it gives you a blown up version that you can then zoom in on to see real detail. Like in this picture, you can see the little strip where there was a windfall in 1845. So that's the kind of detailed information that our researchers are looking for in these maps. And getting them onto New York Heritage allowed us to finally make that accessible, and make it accessible for people. You know, they don't even have to come to me to get these images. They can do all of this themselves. And if they run into trouble, of course, you know, they can reach out to me if they have more questions. But it really empowers people, you know, from all over the state to do a lot of this digging into the collections on their own. So we were really thrilled to get everything into New York Heritage. I'll say also that up to now, we had been cataloging maps kind of piecemeal, but we weren't working from a metadata dictionary. We weren't really working with concrete standards. And so getting this project going on New York Heritage allowed us to start making really clean and consistent metadata. And New York Heritage, you know, they have a metadata dictionary that sort of lays out for you everything that you want to put into your fields and how you should do it. So through the process of doing this, we were able to also clean up a lot of our existing map metadata in PastPerfect. So the way this all kind of played out on our platforms is we create all the metadata to go with these digital map images according to New York Heritage standards. And we upload those collections onto New York Heritage. Then we take that metadata and import it into our own PastPerfect database, which needs a little tweaking, but it's pretty minimal work. And then this way, when the images are live in our PastPerfect, we can link to New York Heritage so that even if you're a researcher who comes to our site first, you can get to that better image online. So that was important to us, that these two things be linked so that people can kind of find their way back and forth across. But then I'll talk a little bit about the special kind of extra features we were able to do with this. So this is where one of the collections, the Emporium Forestry maps, this is where they live on New York Heritage. And the nice thing here, you can see you get a little historical context alongside the collection. And Emporium Forestry Company was just one of the many lumber companies that operated in the park. A lot of their harvesting was done in the area sort of northeast of Tupper Lake. So Piercefield, Cranberry Lake, that region. And if you scroll down on that page, what we developed for this map collection is this little Google Map feature that you see there on the right. And that's something that Ryan Perry from the Central New York Library Resources Council worked up for us. So, you know, before we embarked on this project, we had never made any longitude or latitude metadata for our maps. But from the start, we were like, well, maybe we should start doing this since these are maps. It would be handy to know sort of what areas they're referencing. So we were inputting that metadata anyway. And then I think it was you, Christy, that hooked me up with Ryan to say like, oh, maybe there's a way that latitude and longitude could be fed into some other search interface. So this is what Ryan came up with. He took that metadata that we had created for New York Heritage and then fed it through this third-party software. I think it was a free website. It's called GPS Visualizer. And that sort of takes the metadata, the latitude and longitude, and maps it onto these customizable Google Maps. And I should say, we're in the notes for this, we're going to include a link to Ryan's presentation on that, because he goes through it all in detail and explains much better than I can, like the nuts and bolts of doing that data transfer. But the cool thing that it does is it spits out a Google map with all of your maps plotted on it. And you could do this for photographs too. You could, you know, any collection that has a location sort of basis, you can plot on a map in this way. And so, you know, I think that the thing that we were shooting for, or, you know, the gold standard for this sort of thing is like, you know, New York Public Library has its map warper, where it's geo-rectifying a map onto a current day street grid, which is, you know, that's really cool. But it's beyond, you know, what I'm able to do at my institution with our one IT staffer. So I think this is nice because you don't have to be a large institution with a really sophisticated, you know, technology department to do something like this. Um, and here I'll show an inset of what it looks like. If you click on one of these points, then it pops up this little informational sidebar that includes a thumbnail of the map, the title, a brief description, and then a link to where you can see that map on New York Heritage with the full metadata record. And so, yeah, this isn't perfect. It's giving you just one sort of location point for a map that, you know, shows a larger area. But when you're thinking about the fact that we have, you know, like I said, more than 2,000 maps over the whole park region, this gives you a way to sort of zoom in and zero in on specific areas of the park to see the maps that are going to be relevant to different communities. And so, yeah, this is something we did it for this Emporium map collection kind of as a test run, but I'm hoping, you know, as more of our map collections make it onto New York Heritage, that we can keep replicating this process so that each map collection will get its own little Google map to help people do that kind of visual searching. And yeah, that's my quick overview. I didn't want to take up too much time with that.
We had one question in the chat, in the Q&A rather. What resolution do you scan at? Do you know for the Hudson?
They scanned at, I'm pretty sure it was 400. It was at least 400 PPI. Yeah, and I should mention, you know, some of the maps that we sent them were like 12 feet long, like crazy sized maps that we had, you know, we have a map scanner here, but we needed someone who had, you know, the equipment and the expertise beyond what we could do in-house. So they were really great to work with. And it was, you know, really nice to be able to just pack everything up, send it along, and have it taken care of for us.
Yeah, that has to take like a super big load off your plate. As we wait for people, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. But I have some questions that I can ask. How did this whole project start? What was its sort of like inspiration or inception?
Yeah, it was really, I mean, I kind of alluded to this in the beginning. It was really like born from my own frustration. Just because I was getting these research questions and it took so much effort to answer them. And you know, our museum is very remote. We're kind of smack dab in the middle of the Adirondack Park. We're in the community of Blue Mountain Lake, which I think maybe has 300 year-round residents. There isn't a lot of lodging here, so it's really hard, I think, for researchers to make the trip to come see the collection in person. So I've been trying to get more and more of our stuff available online to meet that need of researchers. And also a lot of these collections, you know, we would maybe have a finding aid that described a map, but it's not a very effective way, I think, to make a map available to researchers. Like, you really have to see the thing to get all the information from it. So yeah, it was really like in my first few months working here, I was like, there's just got to be a better way to deal with this. And so, yeah, writing the grant was a great way to just dive into these new collections that I didn't have a lot of familiarity with, and start, you know, making the plan. I mean, and, you know, of course, if you can get a big grant like that, that gives you a lot of momentum to sort of get a project going, because, you know, even though CLEAR only paid for the actual digitization, and we needed more money to do the conservation side of things. Getting that big grant allowed us to go to other funders and say like, well, look, we already have, 50% of this project is funded, like, can you help us out with the rest? And I think that makes it attractive when it seems like you've done some of the work to move things forward.
Right. And how did you come, were you members already of our council and and then you discovered that we had grants that might assist? Like, how did that all happen? Do you remember?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny. I had actually applied for a grant from Nyland to do a different project with our oral history collections. And then before, like, something kind of screwy happened with notifications, not Nyland's fault at all. It was, I had
Right.
applied to 2 different places basically for the same project. And then I found out, I realized like, oh, I've got more money than I need to do these projects. So then I went back to Nyland and I was like, okay, I don't need the money I asked you for to do an oral history project, but I want to do something with maps. And so Nyland gave me like a small pot of money to do a sort of, what's the word I'm looking for?
Like a
A
preservation.
test run. Well, we did like a
Oh,
test run.
right, pilot.
So yeah, a pilot, exactly. So we sent like a small collection of maps to Hudson Archival and kind of went through the whole process to figure out what was involved. And that gave us a lot of information to make a better grant pitch to clear to then do, the huge collection of maps.
Right. And how did your initial application then change after the pilot? Like, what sorts of things did you take away that you were like, oh, that's a great pointer?
Yeah, well, it was really just the logistics of sending off a map collection. Because again, we're pretty remote, so it was hard to find a vendor within a 3 hours drive who could do this kind of digitization work. And then even once we, found Hudson Archival, we sort of had to figure out like, okay, what kind of equipment do they need to bring here to pack up these maps, and like how much material is it realistic for them to move in a single day, so then when I wrote for the big grant, I knew like, okay, it's going to take them 4 trips of coming back and forth between Hudson and Blue Mountain Lake to get all these maps down there, and we're going to have to do it in phases, so yeah, the logistical side of things was like pretty complicated, but doing that pilot project helped us think through all of the potential difficulties. Because I mean, another thing is that winters are kind of rough up here. So when we planned the project, we set it up so that we wouldn't be trying to transport anything back and forth between like October and March, which is why it ended up being a 2-year grant, because I was like, I need to build in a lot of time just because we don't want to have people traveling here in the winter.
Right. Yeah. It's like 2 calendar years, but really 1 year of a good season.
Yeah.
We have a question in the Q&A. Any surprises or cool stories about any of these maps or mysteries solved by any of them?
Yeah. Well, so I didn't talk too much about the collections, the map collections themselves, but two of the collections of maps that we scanned were from lumber companies. The Emporium Forestry, which is the one that I showed, and then the other one was Finch Prime. And some of these maps, it'll be a huge map that shows you an area that's maybe like 20 acres or something. So it's pretty detailed. And there were all kinds of notations in there that like I just did not know what they meant. They were very specific to those industries. But because we were working on this project, the summer that I was kind of doing all the cataloging, I would have these maps out all the time because I was constantly like looking at them, writing down metadata, figuring out information about the maps. And one of our seasonal employees at the museum happened to come through one of those days, and he was somebody who had worked for a Finch Prine paper company. So I was like, oh, do you know what these maps mean? Like, can you tell me about this? And he had like all of this information. He was like, oh yeah, so this map is telling you, where the lumber camp is located, how many men are working there, who's in charge of them, how many cords of wood they've harvested, what the route is for getting that wood, you know, to the waterways so that it can be floated downstream. So that was really cool. And I mean, I shouldn't be surprised that like the local people here have this knowledge, but it was a really nice way to sort of connect with the knowledge that our staff already has, and tap into that, because I'm not from this region. I'm not, you know, a lumber person, you know, so there was a big learning curve for me just figuring out how to read these maps. But then once that's kind of unlocked, you realize just how much depth of information is embedded in them.
Right. I wrote in the chat, I've learned way more lumber and all that terminology than I ever thought I would know.
Yeah.
And now I know how to say it, prime. That's how you say it.
Yeah, Pruin. Yeah,
Gotcha. I was
not
saying
Peter Piper.
pruin.
Yeah. No, that's
Okay,
another. It
cool.
helps to have a former employee of the company around to tell you even how it's pronounced. Yeah.
Right, exactly. That's so cool. We have another question. Where are your images stored and do you have a digital backup?
We do. So we have it's I don't know the ins and outs of it, I'll be honest, but we have a dedicated drive here on site, where all of the master files go. So all of the highest resolution tips go into that drive, and we, you know, I don't mess with that. Like I work with derivatives. If I need to send images out anywhere, it's all copies made from those master files, and that is backed up onto the cloud regularly. I don't know exactly how often, but I think it's like once a week at least. And then we also, for the first time, set up checksums for these files, so that we are able to monitor if any of the files are becoming corrupted, that sort of thing. And then Hudson Archival also keeps a copy of everything they scan for us. So if there is some catastrophe, we can go back to them. And we pay like maybe $25 a year or something, some nominal storage fee, to make sure that they have a backup also.
Wow, that's great. And can you go over checksums for if people are unfamiliar with that?
Yeah. I mean, my very low level understanding of checksums is it's basically you run the checksum software on a batch of files, and what it does is it analyzes each file and creates a unique number associated with that file, and that gets saved. And then periodically you go back and you analyze those files again, and if the number that it spits out is different than the one you had saved, that means that file has changed. So it's basically a way just to tell, are my files stable or has something become corrupted? And yeah, again, that's something I knew enough to ask the IT guy here, like, can you do this? And he did it, and that's about, the depth of my knowledge. But it's basically, I know that there's free software you can use to set it up, and I think it might take a little, technical know-how to get it set up, but then you can kind of feel assured that your files are stable. I mean, and that's a big thing here too. Like, there had been a map scanning project maybe 15 years ago, like early in the digital era, and a lot of the files from that were saved on an external hard drive, and I still have the drive, but it's not a USB plug. It's some kind of other data plug that like nobody uses anymore. So, it's a good lesson that like we really do need to stay on top of keeping your digital content accessible, because that's just a heartache. If you put a lot of work into making something digital and then it's saved on a floppy disk or something, which we don't have access to anymore.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's a whole other topic.
Yeah. Yeah.
What would you say to smaller organizations even that have these types of questions and they don't have an IT staff? Like, what do you have any recommendations or advice for them?
Yeah, I mean, there's always the networks that the regional councils create so that you can, be asking questions of fellow members. Maybe they're from larger libraries, or maybe they've done projects like this before, to help you sort of scope it out. And I mean, there's also, there's so much online. I know it's kind of tedious to go digging around online to find like how to do this stuff, but there's things like, I mean, I guess maybe I don't use them as much for digitization, but like the Northeast Document Conservation Center, they have those preservation leaflets that are always, really handy to kind of give you a broad overview of like, here's what you should be doing. Or just today I was using, what is it, the National Archives and Records Administration. I think they have a whole, set of standards for what you should be scanning at based on different formats. So there are like, piecemeal different places you can go to get it all together. But I think, I mean, for me, Nylon has been really great to work with, because you're, if you're applying to a grant for a big like national or federal grant, you don't always get a lot of feedback. They're either just like, you got it or you didn't, and you don't always know why. But I think the regional councils are really great, because you can sort of talk to people there to flesh out a project, before you're going for money or before you get started. You can bounce it off of other people and learn from what they're doing. So yeah, those, the list serves are really handy for that, or even just, knowing your network of fellow librarians in your region.
Right, exactly. Brian also mentioned in the chat that ESLN, which is the group of all the councils together, offers a digital dark archive service for long-term digital storage. So if you're interested about that, reach out to your council to chat and ask questions about that. We don't have any questions in the Q&A, so let me go back to my sheet and see. What, besides the weather, did you have any other sort of really big barriers that you sort of were like surprised by?
Yeah, well, I mean, the obvious one was COVID.
Okay, yeah.
It's the barrier, for everybody everywhere this past year. But one thing that I was surprised that it was a barrier. So we were lucky, the way that we timed this project out. Hudson Archival had pretty much finished all of the scanning before everything closed down for COVID. So the nice thing about that was, even though, our museum offices closed, nobody was coming in here for a few months. Even so, I had all of those digital files I could still be working with, because I'm, most of these maps didn't have item level metadata when we started this project. So the scanning was one thing, but the metadata, creating all the metadata, turned out to be like a really big undertaking, like more so than I had expected. And so I was optimistic about that at first, because I said, well, even though I'm not at the museum to look at my physical maps, like I have a whole drive of JPEGs of all the maps. So I should be able to just look at those and create the metadata from that. But it was really, really challenging to create metadata from digital images of the maps as opposed to the physical map. Like I was really surprised at what a difference it was. Just because it's cumbersome, I guess, to have to be zooming in on an image and zooming out. And like, since I wasn't here in the library, I couldn't really make use of all the other resources we have here that help me understand the collections. Because like one major issue, or it's not necessarily an issue, but one major thing you have to work your way around when you're looking at historical maps of the Adirondacks is that like the place names that are common parlance now didn't exist or weren't used, 200 years ago. And so when you're looking at old maps, everything is arranged in terms of these townships, which are like the big subdivisions of the park that the land used to be known by. So, an old map might say, this is a map of Township 34, which isn't really a relevant term anymore. So you have to be, even if you have a map in front of you, I have other maps that I look at that help me sort of bridge the gap between the terms that were used then and the terms that were used now. So like now Township 34, that's what we call Blue Mountain Lake now. But you need a map that shows both the townships and the current day place names to sort of put all that together. And so those are the kinds of resources that I use when I'm on site to create all this metadata. But if I'm at my house, I didn't have that. So um, even it's just kind of a funny lesson that like even though having things digital can make life easier, like sometimes there's just nothing like the real thing, Really,
Mhm.
sometimes you just got to have that physical thing in front of you, because that's what it is that we're ultimately describing.
Right. And did you do this whole, like all like the work really yourself? Like you're the only librarian, correct?
Yeah, I'm the only librarian here, but luckily, over the course of this project, I did have an intern who was working with me, Amanda Phelps, who's at Paul Smith's college now. But but yeah, that was really tricky too because she had an internship where she was coming here in person once a
Hmm.
week, but then because of COVID, she was staying at her place and I was here and I was sending her digital files. But we're both working from like our crummy home internet connections, so like sharing things that way. There was a lot of bottlenecks in the system even when you're working in an online environment where it seems like everything should be streamlined. It still got kind of tricky, but yeah, having another person just to be dealing with this metadata, I wouldn't have been able to meet the grant deadlines had she not also been working on it, so that was a big help.
Right. And I have to say, like your metadata is always just like super
uh,
good. So I have
Thanks.
to say that.
It's one of those things, it's like you only want to have to do it once, so it's like you really gotta make sure you're getting it right. uh,
Mhm,
I
mhm.
hate to go back and correct it.
Right. It's a lot of stuff. Yes, and Amanda's on the call here.
Oh yeah, hi Amanda. Thank you.
Um, if okay, so what would be the first thing you would recommend? Someone who's like, oh my gosh, I have a pile of maps.
Mhm.
It's just me. I have like no money. Like, where do I even start? What would you do?
I would say, and I wish I had done this. I think you need to start with a really solid inventory. Like if you don't have that, that's, I mean, and that's like a nice easy first step, to just establish control of your collection. When I applied for these grants, I had I had finding aids that told me like there's 200 maps in this collection, and I was like, okay, that's good enough for me. I'm gonna put that into the application. And then when it came time to actually pull those maps, it was like, oh, surprise, there's actually 300 maps here, or there's 200 maps, but like half of them have crumbled into dust in the last 20 years. So I think you know it's tempting to just rush to digital because digitizing is like fun and helps you share stuff, but I think you really need to have a very solid inventory of what you have before you even make your first scan of anything. Because I think these projects too, they tend to they have tentacles, like you start off and you're like, I'm just going to do this one thing, but once you're digging around, once you're working with your collections, you'll see a million other things that you need to do. So starting off with that inventory just helps you know the real scope of what you're working with before you do anything else. And then the great thing about that inventory is that when you do want to apply for some funding, like you can even submit that as part of your application to show like, look, I've already done all this preparation work, like I'm ready to go.
Mhm.
um, yeah, and I mean, maybe it seems obvious, but it's like you really got to start with that. And that's, you know, doing the inventory can be tedious, but it's at least you don't need you don't need software for that. Like as long as you have access to like a Google spreadsheet or Excel spreadsheet, like you can get cracking on it. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's always my first step.
Yeah, and you can use any number of the tools that you mentioned to like really hone your metadata, so you have all that sort of
Yeah,
ready as you go, which would be really helpful. And
yeah.
then did you have like a count for how many maps like were like salvageable versus how many did you just like totally lose?
There weren't ones that we totally lost. Like we still have them physically, um, but I had mentioned that we had some maps that were super long,
Yeah.
and those were ones that we ultimately didn't get to scan, and that's partially because of COVID. Like
Mhm.
our vendor was suddenly like under some severe deadlines, and we just didn't have the time to do it.
Mhm.
But the upside is that we still created metadata for them. So even if it's something that didn't get scanned, it at least has a record in our Past Perfect now, so that we know that we have it. Because a lot of these maps, they were kind of like unknown unknowns in the collection. We just had no idea they were there. So
Right.
I mean, that's another, I guess, piece of advice too, is to just, you know, any effort you put toward your collections is going to make access better. So even if you don't get to do everything you wanted to, or you don't get all the bells and whistles, like anything that can get you closer to just getting your collections exposed is going to be better for your collection. It will help you make your case for funding. It has all of these side effects that are beneficial, even if you don't ultimately digitize something.
Right. And especially it helps you like understand like who would be interested in this too. Like
Yeah,
who is that audience?
yeah, because that was a bit of a leap of faith I took on this project. I think I was telling you this the other day. Like, I didn't necessarily start with a group of researchers who were clamoring to get this stuff, because in a lot of ways they couldn't know that we had it because
Mm.
there was just no way of exposing it. So it was sort of it was like Field of Dreams. Like if you build it, they will come, with sort of the philosophy. I was like, okay, I really feel like if I get this stuff out there, the people who need to see it will find it. And so it's been really gratifying now that so much of the stuff is online, when I get a research question and I'm able to say, like, I know exactly what you're looking for and here's where you can go to get it. So people are finding it, and I'm getting research questions from people who maybe didn't know about the museum, but who are stumbling on our stuff in New York Heritage. So I think it helps to, yeah, bring in new researchers also.
Hmm. We do have another question. Um, Sarah says, I'm not very familiar with cataloging maps. How do you handle the place names that change over time, or places that are named, but then that town or road or whatever is never built? Did you have like a process of sorting that through?
Yeah, well, this was where the New York Heritage metadata standards was really helpful. Because yeah, I don't have, I never even took like a cartography class in library school. So I'm it's that philosophy of like whatever you're doing is going to make things better. So even though I know there are librarians with deep dedicated knowledge in working with maps, like this is sort of, we're doing the best with what we have here. But so the metadata dictionary that New York Heritage, um, has on their site for you to use is really helpful, because it kind of gives you a format for how to present place names. It's like, I think it's like you kind of go from specific to the general. So it'll be like town, county, state. Um, so I guess my approach would be like, I when I'm putting something in what's going to be like a search term sort of field, I use what the present day name of a place is, because I'm assuming like, okay, I'm a researcher living in the 21st century, so I'm going to use, common parlance. And then those older place names they'd usually show up in the title field, because it was usually part of the title of the map. But if it wasn't, I would use the description field to sort of plug in, some of the other identifiers that you see on the map. Because a lot of times too, like if the title of the map is, map of Township 34, well, that includes Blue Mountain Lake, that includes, Blue Mountain, it includes, all these other, this is a big issue in the Adirondack Park because we have so many named geographic features, so many mountains and so many lakes. So I would kind of dump all of those place names into the description field, so that, hopefully if someone's just doing a keyword search,
Mhm.
they'll find their way there.
Mhm. Yeah, great. if that answers your question there, Sarah, let us know. Or if you had like a follow-up, let me know too. Because that's always a hard thing to track.
Yeah.
I
just, you just do your best and really like I try to put myself in the mind of a potential researcher to be like, okay, if someone doesn't have a library science degree, and doesn't understand our lingo for things, like what's the common parlance that they're going to be working from.
Yeah, that's a great way to. Oh, Sarah said she saw the town named Sarahsburg, so she was intrigued. Very good. Well, if there aren't any more questions, it is 1:45 or so, so we can wrap up, but I just want to thank everyone for being here, and thank you, Ivy, for presenting this knowledge to members who potentially could find it very valuable in their own work. And thank you, Ryan and CLRC, for hosting, and keep an eye on communications for the next New York Heritage Bits and Bytes. And I will say, have a great afternoon and be safe, everyone.
Thanks, Christy. And yeah, I would just one plug for New York Heritage. It's such a great system, and you guys have so much information up front that makes it, I think, a lot easier to embark on a digitization project. Like that metadata dictionary is so useful. And so I would say if anybody is, anxious about trying to use it, like, don't be. Contact, your local liaison for it and start putting stuff up there because it's so great. I love it.
Right. And I am going to share real quick a bunch of links and things. If anyone wants to save the chat, that's all there. And yes, Anne Marie said there was a metadata guide on. It's actually on New York Heritage on the website. So if you go to the new website, which is nyheritage.org, we'll put it in the chat here too. And if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, it is under 4 contributors. 4 contributors. And if you scroll down below that, you'll see metadata dictionary and collection development. And there are also a lot of other sort of materials, marketing materials, promotional stuff, digitization help. We have a digitization vendors guide, which I posted in the chat earlier just now, and a lot of technical guides and help. But as always, if you need any help, reach out to your council, and we're always there for you. And Ryan just put the metadata dictionary link in there directly too. So that is like very important, the metadata dictionary.
Yeah,
somewhere.
It's great to have that when you start out, so that you know what fields you want, what information you want to put in there, so you're not trying to fix anything later. Start with that dictionary.
Right. Oh, sorry, here, Anne Marie. That is, there we go. Sometimes there's a default to only the panelists, so there you go. So go ahead, grab the chat. You are welcome to, say adios, and we will, we're always available. So if you need help, let us know. But thanks, Ivy. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, New York Heritage.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, and we'll see you later.